Hi everyone, I hope you are enjoying this great International Translation Day event. My name is Mustafa Mahmoud. I'm a translator and a journalist from Egypt. Today, we're gonna set off for a journey inside the mind of a translator. Here is a sneak peek to our today's session. We're gonna discuss translation and culture and the most prominent translation theories and techniques. I hope you're doing well in this uncertain time of coronavirus pandemic. I want to start from here. Last August, the World Health Organization said that there might never be a silver bullet for COVID-19. At the height of the crisis, I was busy reporting on the pandemic. My work includes translation of news reports. I wanted to translate silver bullets. As you know, a bullet cast from silver is a metaphor for a magical solution to a difficult problem. But in Arabic, my native language, silver might not work well in this context. Actually, the equivalence of silver here is a golden bullet, as popular in one of the most popular youth novel series, File Future. I'm sure you always encounter texts where word-for-word translation will sound weird. Also, earlier this year, I wanted to translate a UNESCO handbook on journalism, and there was that sentence that read, "But if an investigator needs a friend that badly, he or she should buy a dog." Dog, as a social object, is not the same across cultures, and that should reflect in translation as well. Here in my region, dogs are usually kept for a reason, probably for security. Some people keep them as a pet as well, but again, the word dog here is a swear word, like pig in the United States. So in translation, me and a colleague decided to translate it as a cat, which is more fine in our culture. And the author doesn't really mean dog as an animal, but rather as a metaphor, actually. That takes us to the core of our session. While busy chasing a deadline, translating a text, or subtitling a long, boring video, it's our job to scan the text for those subtle nuances of meaning. We should keep in mind that the culture of the speakers of the source language can be different from those of the target language. When we realize the position of each language from one another and determine to which degree they converge and diverge in terms of culture, translating the text becomes more natural and readable, and not just a group of foreign jargon written in a different language that doesn't make sense or makes the target audience feel alienated or raise their eyebrows. In translation, we should ensure no eyebrows are raised. Understanding culture and language is crucial to the translation process. Our perception of the world differs according to many things. The way we are raised, genes, education, but we were not told that language affects how we see the world around us as well. So for example, take a very simple word like uncle. According to an English speaker, what comes to their mind when they hear that simple word is different from what comes to the mind of an Arab or a Spaniard when they hear the same word in their languages. In many languages, there are two forms of the word uncle, a paternal one and a maternal one. So when an American kid hears the word, what comes to their mind may be Uncle John, who is the brother of his mother. But in the mind of an Arab or a Spanish or a French kid, what comes to their mind is either this or that. Our perception of nature also varies according to language. For example, in English, we have a rat and a mouse, but in Arabic, we only have one word for both of them. So what comes to our mind, as Arabs, when we hear the word is just one of them, not both of them. This is huge, and ultimately it affects how we translate. Unless we are conscious of these subliminal nuances of meaning that are related to the nature of language and culture, we can end up with a messed up target text, especially when translating poetry, metaphors, or figures of speech. I'm giving you a practical example from a book I was translating last year about autism from English into Arabic. Well, the book was full of instructions for teachers and parents to correct unwanted behaviors among autistic children. One of those instructions was to keep the kids' attention during the therapy session by stopping them from engaging themselves in a self-satisfactory action, like playing with their hair or twisting their hands or playing with pencils. So, I stopped at the word pencil. What does the author really want to say? Does this mean if the kid is playing with a pen, not pencil, the instruction isn't valid anymore? Of course not, it is. This happens because the English language has either the word pen or pencil, but in Arabic and maybe other languages, we have a neutral word for the tool we write with. And this tool could either be a pen or a pencil by adding a modifier. So my decision was to go for this neutral word without any modifier. This method is known as semantic loss, where you drop a component of the meaning to convey it better. Sounds weird, isn't it? But if it's true, in many cases. Speaking of Arabs, and since I am one of them, we used to have dozens of words for the term desert, and each one has a certain connotation. None of them are the same. So for example, the word mafaza actually means a victorious place. They call it such as an optimistic way that they will be able to survive crossing this vast swath of dangerous land. Another word is bayda, which is simply means a place that is viewed very easily. And this is because, you know, desert is an empty place. There are no buildings or forests, and you can see easily there. Compare this to an Eskimo or someone who lives in Siberia or Canada. What's a desert to them? Probably just, you know, a place full of silicon pebbles. On the other hand, those people have dozens of distinctive words for snow, ice, etc. An example for verbs is to forgive a sin in English. What comes to the mind of an English speaker is to give unconditionally. This is completely different from the equivalence in Arabic, yaghfir, which is derived from the word maghfar, which means a headgear that protects against swords in wars. So the idea of forgiveness in English is about giving, but in Arabic it's about the protection against the consequences of sins. An example from the IT field is how Arabic speakers and English speakers perceive modifying a file name. English speakers perceive it as naming a file one more time, rename, while Arabic speakers see it as changing the current name. This way of thinking and perception also affects when the different locales of the same language. For example, a mobile phone versus a cell phone. British people perceive it on the basis of how it's used. That said, the phone can be carried as you go. That is why it is a mobile phone. On the other side, Americans perceive it on the basis of how it works. That said, the transmitter's span of coverage, which is called a cell, so it's called a cellular phone or a cell phone. Take the word ambassador. In English, it has its roots in the Proto-Indo-European language as to move forward. The word was used in the Celtic, Latin, and Proto-German in the sense of a servant or a messenger. In the meantime, the word ambassador or safir in Arabic is derived from the word yusafir, which means to travel, and yusafir is taken from the root asfara, which means to explore or to uncover. For two reasons. First, travel uncovers the difference, probably the real persona of a person, since they are free to do what their native traditions ban. And the second is, this root also means that an ambassador is exploring different parts of the world. The grammar of a language is also a reflection of how we perceive tenses and how we translate them as well. So in English, Spanish, French, and maybe other languages, we have different kinds of the past tense. We have the simple tense, the perfect tense, the perfect past, the past perfect continuous, And in Spanish, we have el pretérito indefinido, el pretérito pluscuamperfecto. And in French, we have the imparfait, the passé composé, passé simple, and so on and so forth. But that's not all. We also have modes of verb. We have the indicative, the imperative, and subjunctive, which is more prevalent in Latin languages. In English, in Arabic, we only have one past tense and only imperative and indicative. But how we express this plethora of tenses and modes? This is done by adding modifiers and restructuring the syntax of the sentence. That doesn't mean that languages do not converge. Germanic and Latin languages and Arabic share the etymology of the word language itself, which means a tongue. But since we're discussing translation, we have to deal with untranslatability and the distinctive features of each language pair in order to bridge the gap, or at least we can have a shared vision of the word or understand how others perceive it when we read in their languages. And this takes us to our next point, translation theories. Many theories attempt to explain translation. For the sake of time, we will discuss two similar theories only, which are closely related to our main theme. The first is Eugene Knighton's equivalence, and this breaks down into two. The formal equivalence, which focuses on the need to pay attention to the form and content contained in the message, and the dynamic equivalence. He used to call it formerly functional equivalence, but now we usually call it dynamic equivalence, and it focuses on the message received by the audience. The second is Peter Newmark's approach. This also breaks into two. The communicative translation, which attempts to produce on its readers an effect as close as possible to that obtained on the readers of the original, and semantic translation, which attempts to render as closely as the semantic and syntactic structure of the second language allow the exact contextual meaning of the original. We can see that there is similarity between the formal equivalence and the communicative approach, and between dynamic equivalence and semantic translation. But how can we take an informed decision before choosing between the two contradictory methods? There is no clear-cut answer. Language is a complex thing. It's related to human nature, the target audience, and how the culture of the SL and TL converge or diverge. From our experience, we see linguists who like the first method by sticking to every letter of the SL, and others who like the second method by giving the SL a new facelift. The bottom line in most cases is to ask yourself, will the reader of the TL understand your translation? We are giving examples, but we will focus on when the first method, which favors the SL to the TL, fails to convey a proper or best meaning, or even leads to an incomprehensible or a contradictory meaning. To go Dutch. This is when everybody pays for themselves at a group event or shares the bill among everyone, regardless of what you ordered. If translated into Arabic as ill, nobody would even understand it. Instead, in Egypt, for example, we say to go English. Actually, perhaps this came from during the British occupation in Egypt. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? It's a Shakespearean line. Muhammad Ainani, the prominent Arabic translator, renders it as, in Arabic, shall I compare thee to a spring's day? This is a really classic example. Why did Ainani translate summer as spring? This is a completely different season. But the thing is that in the Arab world, in summer, people are baking and sizzling in an extremely hot sun. So it doesn't have a good connotation, unlike in the UK, where they suffer long, dreary, cold winters. So simply, if you compare your beloved one to a summer's day, probably she's gonna dump you. In the same sense, we can translate the phrase, the news warmed my heart, as it is, the news snowed in my heart. Another example, color. Not blue or green, it's a journalism jargon actually. And to add color to a story means to add humanized and imaginative elements to the storytelling elements. But that is in English. In Arabic, it means completely different. It even conveys the opposite connotation. It means a biased story or non-balanced or non-objective storytelling. So even if you look it up in a jargon dictionary, you may get the wrong meaning. So be careful, because that even the simplest words may convey an irrelevant meaning in the same industry. So more quick examples: sticky fingers. In Arabic, they becomes long hands. The goose that lays golden eggs becomes the chicken that lays golden eggs. Chiming slogans, it becomes ringing slogans. Steal your thunder, it becomes snatch the lights from you. And to carry coals to Newcastle, this one is idiomatic, and it needs an equivalent one. So one suggestion is to sell dates in Hajar, which used to be an ancient city known for quality palm dates, whereas Newcastle was known for quality coal, as you know. And Black Friday, who doesn't like it? It becomes completely the opposite. A White Friday, because Friday is a holy day in the Muslim world. And if you have a car or and if you have a dead battery, that won't work in Arabic. If you're talking about a vehicle battery, it becomes a sleeping battery. Why? I don't know, but maybe this is your assignment for the next time. Any other battery, we say it as the battery is emptied. So the adjective has changed as well as it turned into a verb. I think it works in Spanish, maybe la batería está muerta or something like this. Also, an important usage of the equivalence and approach methods is the adaptation of cartoons, characters, games, etc., or simply localize them to suit the target language culture. Now we move to untranslatability problem-solving techniques. And untranslatability is a result of language and culture incompatibility, which affects our translation process, and that we are trying to get around it. There are lots of techniques. Probably the most famous ones are the 7 techniques suggested by theorists Vinay and Darbelnay. But for the sake of time, we will discuss only 5 of them. There are 2 types, the direct and the oblique techniques. The direct, we have the borrowing, the calque, and letter translation. And in the oblique category, we have transposition and modulation. So borrowing. Borrowing means to overcome a lacuna or a gap. It's often associated with words that are of traditional or a cultural connotation, like Sharia, jurisdiction, jihad, a holy war. There is no equivalent in English, or there is an equivalence that would lead to incomprehensibility to a certain audience. So, for example, if we translate jihad as a crusade, that would make a chaos, actually. It also creates, borrowing also creates a stylistic effect, like the word ghetto. And it also recreates the flavor of the source language, like tortillas, sushi, dhikr, which is the Arabic word for remembrance of God, Allah, nadar, which means envy, sombrero, which is a Spanish or a Mexican hat. Also in the legal field, Latin and French expressions like prima facie, force majeure are excellent examples of borrowing that have been made through time. Borrowing, sometimes it's also taken as is. So for example, halal or kosher, which is food available for Muslims or Jewish people. It means permissible. Or the word hijab, the same goes. Calque. This one is a bit straightforward, although the word is maybe not that familiar. And the expression, where the expression is just translated as is. For example, handball, skyscraper, non-violence, recycling, money laundry, extinguish a debt, play a role. But again, it depends on how the source language audience would perceive it. Because, for example, play a role, this one is actually contested in Arabic because role has a serious connotation while play has a maybe underrated or a playful connotation. A literal translation, and this is a common mistake, it isn't word-for-word translation. And actually, it's a perfect choice for idioms that can be transposed element by element into the target language. In some languages, utterances would translate perfectly to the target language. In other cases, this might not happen smoothly. Take return to pitch as an example. This is translated perfectly into Arabic as is, save for changing pitch into the plural form. Also a white lie. I think this is even a universal one in many languages. The previous ones were the direct techniques. Now we move to the oblique techniques, and those come in hand in times when direct translation techniques do not work because they are either structurally impossible or the target language doesn't have a corresponding expression, which can lead to that the generated text would have a different meaning or no meaning or a foreign or it can be a foreign structure. So, for example, Adam plays football. In Arabic, a verbal sentence is preferred more, and hence direct translation is no longer possible here. We have to place the verb plays before the subject Adam. This is very common when translating languages where the verb comes late in a sentence. Like in Turkish, for example. This is very common in Turkish. Transposition, this is an oblique technique and it operates on the grammatical level, adverb, noun, adjective, etc. And it happens with the replacement of a word class by another word class without changing the meaning. And there are two types. Free, like an adjective in Arabic. Take, for example, important. It can become yahumuna, which means it's important to us, but it's in the verb form. And it can be muhim, which is in the adjective form. This is the free transposition technique. It can also, in some cases, be compulsory to use it. And this is common when the source language and target language have switching possession of nouns and adjectives, like in English and Latin languages or Arabic, where usually an adjective comes after the noun. An example from Spanish, a black shirt becomes la camisa negra. This is a very famous song. So the word negra, which is black, comes after the word camisa, which is shirt. And this becomes compulsory in this case. Last but not least, modulation. And it means a change in the point of view. It may involve a change of grammatical categories. So it is used when the other techniques will generate a text that is grammatically correct but unsuitable and not idiomatic or just simply awkward. So for example, take the phrase no entry. In Arabic, it's correct and conveys the meaning if translated as is, but it sounds weird and awkward. A better version would be do not enter. Here what happens is it becomes the negative and imperative mood, not a noun anymore. Another example is I haven't heard a word from him. It would be more correct or better to translate it as I haven't heard about him. One familiar example in localization is the phrase before you can proceed, you must read and accept the terms. In Arabic, it would be you must read and accept the terms to proceed. That's all, folks, for today. So far we discussed culture, language theories, techniques, and how culture affects what's going on inside the mind of a translator to produce a target text that reads naturally and smoothly by the target audience. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed it. You have my email on my Proz account. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. Goodbye.